Okay. Hi, my name's Scott Golightly, and I'm a regional director from Utah. And I'm sure we've all been in this situation before where we're sitting in a meeting and someone, our boss, the CTO, security expert in the company, an external consultant, someone comes in with this harebrained idea. They went to a conference, they read a book, looked at a magazine article, something, and they come back and they say, you know what, we need strong passwords. We need to secure our data. And it sounds fine, and it's good. You know, nobody wants to say, well, let's just give out our data to the hackers. And now with Sarbanes-Oxley and some of these other regulations, it's really in the CTO's best interest to keep them out of jail to make sure that these things are secured. The problem is that security has been a hard thing to do. Anytime that we do security, then we start looking at and have problems with how do we make sure that our we balance the need of the users to get to the data or to whatever system it is that we're securing with a security around it. I mean, we all know the most secure computer is one that's unplugged, but it's not very useful unless you're looking for a boat anchor. So we have to have a balancing act there. With SQL Server 2000, this has always been a problem for an administrator to enforce this policy. So I can set up a policy that says the users have to change their passwords every 90 days, but how do I make sure that they're doing that? Well, the way to do that, I'm going to look at the syslogins table, and I'm going to select from that, and you'll see that I have here a bunch of logins, and my TechEd login is still there. I have it. So I have a TechEd login. I'm going to drop that login. And now that the login has been dropped, let's make sure that he's not there. I'm going to go and add this login back in with a password of password. Now we all know that's not very secure, but as I create this login, we'll go up and look at our syslogins table again, and we see that we have a TechEd login, and his login time, or the time that he was last updated, is 9/21. That will be important for us to know. So as I open up a new window and log in as this user, I can go in and I can set the log in with the username of TechEd and the password, and now this user gets in and they have some permissions. I'm in the Northwind database, and ideally what I would like to do is have my user go in and set a new password. So they do SP password, and they're going to give me their old password and their new password. This is complex. And if I go ahead and run that, you'll see that I was able to change the password. If I switch back to my first window where I'm logged in as an administrator to check it, again, remember the old time was at 9/21/08. So I can go ahead and run this again, and I see a new time now at 9/22. So you can see that the time down here has been changing. So that works if the user changes their password. The problem with this thing is that that column is used not just for password changes, but for other changes. So if I go in and say SP default DB, and I change my default DB to pubs. Oh, I have to give it in quotes, I think it is. Oh, sorry, forgetting the username. TechEd pubs, and I run that. Now my default database has changed. So again, if I switch back to my first window as an administrator, and I run this query again, I see that the time's going to change from 9/22 to about 9/22:55. So as the user goes in and makes any kind of changes, that update date column changes. So I have no way really of enforcing and making sure that this user has been changing their password. I can see that they've made changes on the database, but I don't know that it's a password change. So what I want to do now is switch over to SQL Server 2005 and look at what we can do there. So in SQL Server 2005, if I open up a query window here and have the ability to go in and connect up to my database, I need to connect up with Windows Authentication, and I'm going to open up a script here that's going to help me and I'm going to look at some of the new system tables. So this is a way that as an administrator I can go in and I can set up and make sure that my users are following my policy. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. So I'm going to select from the syslogins table in the sysschema the name and the modify date for my users. And you'll see that I have right now only the SA. I have two other columns here, is policy checked and is expiration checked. And these are going to tell me whether the user and their login is checked for policy, which requires strong passwords. It requires a minimum length and will allow me to do password unique passwords, to require unique passwords, or I can look at the is expiration check, will tell me if the password is going to expire. All of this is based off of the policy in Windows Server 2003 and above. So if I go into my administrative tools, local security policy, I can go in and I can see that at this point the password must meet complexity requirements is disabled. So that means that I don't have any requirements on what my user can do or cannot do as far as password. So I'm going to create a login, again TechEd, with a password. I'm going to give it this optional statement here that says must change, telling me that the user must change this the next time that they log in. So I'll go ahead and create that user. And now if I go and log in as TechEd, database engine query. I'm going to go in there and tell it I want SQL Server authentication. I'm going to log in as the user TechEd, and I'm going to use the password. And if I type that correctly, you'll see I get prompted immediately for a password change. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to make this password something like new. 3 characters, very easy to get in, and it lets me in. So now I've, again, set up and I don't have strong passwords. But if I go back here to my local security and I enable my password security requirements for Windows Server 2003, that's going to flow through to SQL Server 2005. And now, if I go in here and try to change my password, so I'm going to give it the new password, and if I change it back to password, which was a very simple, easy to break password, I see that I get an error. Password validation failed. The password does not meet Windows policy requirements. Okay, so the other thing that I can do here to get this to work, I can go in and do password new is the old password, and then this one here, AS23, something like this, a difficult to remember password. Okay, and so now if I set that and execute this, you'll notice that the command's completed successfully and I was able to get to my password. Okay, if I go back to my other window, I want to show you just a couple of other things to be aware of. If I want to set up a particular password that does not require my policy checking, so I have a need for whatever reason, maybe it's a third-party tool that I can't set passwords on or something, I can go in and I can either create or alter a login with this with check policy off. So if I do that, I can set back my TechEd user password to password, and that information is not checked. If I go back up and look, here you'll see that my is policy checked and is expiration checked are both 0, telling me that that user does not. One other thing is that if I use the must change, I need to have check policy and check expiration turned to on. That's the default. So earlier when I just had the must change keyword, it worked for me. But this will fail because if either check policy or check expiration is off, you're not allowed to do this. So let's go back to PowerPoint here really quick and see what we've talked about. So we talked about security password in SQL Server 2000, how it was hard to audit. We've talked about enabling password security in SQL Server 2005 and how we really need to make sure that as an administrator we set up those accounts and we know whether we've got password security on or off, and we can query the SQL logins table to see if that's set on a particular login. The final issue is what happens when we set this. Okay, well, first of all, there's some things to be aware of. As I said at the beginning, trade-offs between security and access to data. If I had a really difficult to remember password like the one that I showed you in the demo, chances are that I'm going to either write it on a yellow sticky note and put it on my monitor, or I put it in a notebook, or put it in a desk drawer, someplace where I can get to it. And that's less secure. You may give ourselves the feeling that it's more secure because it's more difficult to remember, But if the users do things like that to circumvent us, we're back to where we were before. The other thing to be aware of is what do you do about service accounts or accounts that you set up for a particular application. So I have an application that users are logging into, and that password expires every 42 days or every 90 days or whatever. I need to have some sort of a policy that I can use to send this new password out to the user. So as you develop applications, as you talk to the people who are developing your front-end applications, you need to make sure that there's an ini file, a registry setting, something that you can use group policy, you can use replication, SMS, some other way to make sure that that password information gets sent out there. So I hope that you've had a chance here to see how you can set up password security in SQL Server 2005 and that you'll be better able to use that in your development and better able to secure your data in the future. Thank you.